This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not reflect the views of the Village Network. If you are struggling with mental health, please see our show notes for a list of resources.
Welcome to Let's Explore That, presented by the Village Network. I'm Lynette.
I'm Matthew.
And I'm Clint.
And we are here today with our extra special guest, Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Perry is a neuroscientist. He has a PhD, a master's degree, a social work degree. I don't know what this man hasn't done. He is the author of 3 books, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, Born for Love, and What Happened to You, his most recent book, which he co-authored with Oprah Winfrey. On top of that, Dr. Perry is the founder of the Neurosequential Network, and he has published about 1 million academic articles.
That's what it seems like.
Wow. And we use his model of therapeutics with our youth. We've been using it for 10 years. He has changed the way we operate, which is amazing. It is just so cool.
His book, Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, taught me lots and lots of things just about brain development and whatever. Kind of made me a fan of neuropsychology and all that sort of stuff, something I never thought I would really be into, but it was really cool to have read the book and then got to sit down with him and have a conversation. And he's just such an incredibly kind person and an open book when it comes to asking questions about the brain and where he met bears.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited for everybody to hear this conversation.
Absolutely. And if you want to hear a little more from Dr. Perry and about his work with the Village Network, we have a couple of bonus episodes that have dropped alongside this one, where he has a conversation with our CEO, Rich Graziano, and our Chief Clinical Officer, Dave Paxton, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. In addition to that, too, we get to talk to some other people who work at the Village who have worked directly with Dr. Perry and kind of in their specific silo of work that they do and how the neurosequential model has been applied to that. So they're both really great episodes as well, and I hope everybody enjoys those.
Yeah. Lauren Young's going to talk about residential. Tiffany White's going to talk about foster care. And then we have Ayana Hall talking about early childhood. It's so cool.
And Ayana has an episode coming up later on in the season as well.
Yeah, as does Tiffany. Oh my gosh, we have so many cool people here.
Yep.
We do. How did we get here?
I don't know. But
and it's just amazing. We got through that interview, and I did not ask him about Waco because that was probably my favorite chapter because we watched it unfold on TV. And then the other thing was I didn't ask about Oprah.
We forgot to ask Dr.
We
Perry
did.
about Oprah, and I really want to know what she's like.
I know.
I'm
just
sure
have to
she's
have him
very
back.
nice. And I think he'll probably come back and talk with us again. But
Absolutely.
without any more delay, here's
Yes.
a conversation with Dr. Bruce Perry.
Hi, Dr. Perry.
Hi guys. Sorry I'm late, and I was hanging with some Hollywood good and great, which is kind of crazy, but
Wow.
That is so cool. Your life is way cooler than ours.
Yes.
Absolutely.
no, my life is in this chair, one chair. It's like I never leave. I feel like I'm gonna grow roots here. Anyway,
Well, thank you.
how are you guys?
We're great. How are you?
great.
I'm doing all right. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Well,
Yeah.
we were just saying we get to be here without our bosses today, so we were calling it Perry After Dark.
You guys have so many funny things. It just makes me laugh. Like,
We love that. And thank you for the shout out because Clint was actually the producer on the video for the intro at OCA with the kids. And so
that was so good.
It was a lot of
I
fun
just
to put
started
together.
laughing. Yeah, I started laughing because, when we first came up with that, when I first came up with the name, everybody's like, no, we need to have like the brain science this or trauma informed. And I'm like, no, we got to make it really pop, really different.
Mhm.
Because this whole field is just going to come. Everybody's like, oh no, trauma informed. This is so new. I'm like, nah, it's not going to be new forever. So anyway,
Absolutely. In fact, that kind of jumps into our first question because so when we knew we were going to have a chance to talk to you, I immediately reached out to all of my other mom friends. And just so you know, you have a huge fan base among anxious suburban moms. And I said, if you guys could talk to Dr. Perry, what would be the one question you would ask him? And what we got were variations of the same ultimate question, which was, how do I know if I have already irrevocably up my child? Because we think we're doing it all the time. And secondly, what is the best way to help them grow into kids that are resilient enough to deal with the mistakes that we know we're making?
The interesting thing is that the answer to the second is related to the first. So whether you feel it or not, what builds resilience are your little mistakes. The little times when children are hungry, or they do get cold, or they do get challenged, or they do have to get up in front of their peers and recite a poem, or they do have to get nervous because they're up at bat. And all of those little things they activate your stress response system. And yes, your child is going to, in that moment, feel a little anxious. But if you get through that, after you are at bat and you take a swing, and if you miss, your teammates still pat you on the back. If you hit it, they yell and scream, and you have had this wonderful success. And you learn to tolerate a little bit of distress. And as you have more and more of these little successes, the degree of challenge can grow. And that's really what resilience is. Resilience comes from lots of opportunities to fail, and lots of opportunities to explore, and lots of opportunities to kind of make a mess and make a mistake and correct that. And the wonderful thing about parenting, parents who sort of even ask that question, oh my God, I think I've screwed up my kid, is that is like 100% somebody who cares enough to actually repair the ruptures that are inevitable with parenting. And so you may get frustrated and yell, but you're also going to say, listen, I shouldn't yell. I'm really sorry. And are we good? And you can model all kinds of wonderful things for kids just by being a regular human being. And so the answer to the first one is no, you have not done anything that's irrevocable. And in part of your job is to put them in situations that are challenging, and to be close enough to kind of catch them if they fall, but make sure that they continue to have these little challenges. And one of the mistakes we are making in modern parenting, I think, is that sometimes we get so anxious about doing the right thing that we don't let our kids experience that tension, that challenge. We don't let them climb. We don't let them get too dirty. We don't let them wander off a little bit. And I think that I think that can actually be a really good experience for kids and for parents.
That really reminds me of I'm in the middle of Born for Love. And that reminds me of the chapter of the boy who had the birthmark on his face, and how you had mentioned that she paid too much attention almost, and that it created more issues down the road because the stress response system did not have the ability to develop. That's really interesting.
And it's related to that. A lot of people, you probably heard of kids that have either school refusal, or they get so over anxious when they're dropped off for the first time at kindergarten that they can't even handle it. A lot of that, we see more of that with kids who've never had an opportunity to kind of wander around and explore and build this comfort level with a little bit of distress. There's just no doubt about it. When you're the first day as an adult at a new job, you're anxious, right? You don't know these people. You don't know the routines. You don't know where, am I supposed to pay for my coffee, or can I take coffee, or I'm just going to watch other people take coffee and I'm going to go without coffee. All of those little things you do to kind of negotiate that. Just think about that magnified a million times for kids that, once the first day of school, it's like they got to settle in. It takes a while. And then it's just about when they really get into a groove, a rhythm, then we move them to second grade, and then they kind of have to do it again. And then we move them to third grade. And, we actually demand more change, more transitions, and introduce more novelty for children than we do for people who are adults. Any of you who've been in let's say any organization or any system, whether you've been a teacher or a child care worker, whatever, think about how unsettling it is when somebody comes in, oh, we have a new program and we're going to introduce that program and some new forms. And like you just settle into that. And then 6 months later, they go, oh, you know what? We're going to have a new program. And that's what kids have to go through literally all through school. So those challenges, I think, help them build resilience. But it also, it's really important for us to recognize as adults, we are challenging kids. So when they come home at 3:30, 4 in the afternoon, and we basically want to talk about their homework or do your chores, do whatever, and they have a meltdown, it's not surprising at all, right? That's the last thing they need. They're finally back home, or it should be safe. I want to get regulated. I should know the routines here, familiar smells and sights and sounds. And now you're asking me about my homework?
Okay, it's like you've been to my house. But thank you. That was very insightful. And so what I'm hearing you saying is, and this is what you talked about at OCA, the importance of kind of constant but predictable minor stressors. When does that tip into something that is harmful?
Well, and that's a really great question. And the challenge to answering that is that the tipping point for one child might be different than it is for another child. And so here's the dilemma. First of all, lots of things can determine that sort of the point at which you're overwhelmed versus the point at which you can sort of handle it. Part of it might be, and we think there are certain sort of constitutional elements to the child. It could be genetic, intrauterine, but if you've ever parented multiple kids, you know that they come different. They're different, you know. You might have one child who can kind of is a sensation seeker and kind of is okay with novelty, and another kid who's like, oh, that's a little too much for me, and they step back. And so what worked for one child may not work for another child. And so this is the dilemma, this is the challenge of parenting and of teaching and doing anything where we put kids into a group. And like in school, for example, the educators put together a curriculum that they think includes tolerable challenges that for kids this age. But you may have a child who, for whatever reason, is a little bit behind, and that gap may be too big. They may be too overwhelmed, and they'll get really dysregulated. And then you'll have some kids that they've already mastered this stuff, and so they're freaking bored. I mean, and so they'll act out. And so the teacher has kind of two groups of kids that they're trying to manage while the rest of the class is focusing on the lesson. One group is like so hopelessly lost that they've shut down or they're acting out. The other group is like so bored that they're like, you know, they're causing, like me. I mean, not to suggest I cause trouble in class. But I would, you know, I would sit back and I don't know, for whatever reason, I just would hear something and I'd remember it. And then after a while, I'm like, God, we already did this. And it just drove me crazy. So I would like throw things and kind of see if I could make things blow up a little bit. And it was from a sport, you know, classroom was a sport. It really wasn't, you know, a learning experience. So that's very disruptive though. And so I think that point is a challenge, you know, and this is why it's so hard when a teacher's got 30 kids versus 12. You know, if you've got 12 kids in your classroom, you can kind of over time get a handle for, he's going to get this really well, so I can leave him alone. This kid's going to need a little bit more attention, so I can focus on this child and bring him towards the middle. And you can kind of do that with about 12 kids. Once you get larger than that, then it really becomes a juggling act, and you're kind of playing the whack-a-mole game. You know, you address this crisis and then this crisis, and everybody kind of just goes along slowly. So it's a challenge, and it really is one of the major. You know, when we teach parents and kind of non-clinicians about the neurosequential model, we talk a lot about this issue of like, what's the sweet spot for having something that's the right dose of a challenge. And then after you have that challenge, what's an adequate period of time to kind of get back to your baseline? So what dosing and spacing? And sometimes we have a dose that's tolerable, but then we move on to something new, and then we add something new before the child's kind of been able to kind of get back to equilibrium. So if we keep adding concept after concept after concept, pretty soon almost any of these kids are going to get dysregulated. So this is why we always like to put in place kind of these sensory regulatory breaks, even 3 to 5 minute little things. And they could be something as simple as get up and stretch. Let's take a few deep breaths. Let's do a couple jumping jacks. All right, now let's settle down and come back, and we're going to talk about history or whatever. Mm-hmm. And when we do those things, it helps kids get back to their baseline quicker, so they're then ready for another new challenge. And in classes where we don't integrate regulatory things, what we find is these kids have a harder time concentrating, focusing, and learning and retrieving, and all the stuff that goes with academics.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, my wife will for sure appreciate hearing a lot of that. She is a former educator, and that you described all the things that are challenges in the classroom. And she was even special ed, where she's already got a smaller group of students, and even still, a lot of time her stuff was full inclusion, so they were included with the rest of the group, which is helpful from, at least from her perspective, on the education side. But having to manage all of that, all the students, it becomes a challenge. And she always found more success with one-on-one or small group teaching, because you can give the attention that's required.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm actually one of the things, a lot of the research about inclusion, which I think in the right circumstance is wonderful. It's wonderful for kids who are developmentally doing well to actually be with kids that are struggling and learn how to be empathic and supportive and be part of that process where they have this mutual learning experience. And it's also really good for these kids that are struggling to get modeling and other kinds of containment around behaviors and so forth. Mm-hmm. The dilemma is that you can't have a universal, you really have to pay attention to the ratio. So if you've got a class of 12 and you've got 3 or 4 kids that are really struggling, you're right at the tipping point of what you can manage. Because if you have 5 kids like that are really reactive, and you have 12 kids and 7 of them are really well regulated and doing fine, you're just not going to be able to maintain the regulatory climate for everybody. And so I'm always very, administrators ask me all the time about inclusion or not inclusion. And I'm like, it's great, but you really need to look at the burden, sort of the regulatory burden that the educators got to create in order to allow appropriate positive aspects of inclusion. Mm-hmm. And, if you get 3 or you get 4 out of 20, well, you get past 20%, 25% of the kids that are struggling, and you're just not going to, the idealized inclusion stuff just won't happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for her, it was always, she loved the self-esteem boost of the kids that would be deemed as, needing special education or just, that extra help, that bringing them into the classroom. Even she was elementary intervention. And so she's like, I have 2nd and 3rd graders who already know that they're the odd kid out. Yeah. And so she was like, the self-esteem boost that they get by being able to be in the class with everybody else is just huge. But yes, you're exactly right. I think that there's the numbers can create an issue.
It takes me back to when I was in school and I was classified as learning disabled. LD is what they called it. And I had to go to a trailer to learn outside of the school and feel different. And when I went to our Youngstown facility and saw that these kids were in the classroom and using Dr. Perry's NMT work, being pulled out, working through grounding, whatever they needed in that moment, and getting back to the school. But then the kids in the morning, when I overheard them saying, like, so and so has a test today and they're anxious about it, like the fact that their classmate knew that, I thought, boy, we did it wrong when I was in school. So it was really nice to see that we're fixing it.
Yeah. And I think one of the most powerful human drives is that the need to feel like you belong. And when anything, whatever it is, whether it's race or religion or ability or cognitive strength or athletic capability, whatever group you're in and you're made to feel marginalized, that just is brutal. And I do think that there are things that we can do that are very simple, very concrete, and very useful in making people feel included. And one of the things, I don't want to call it a trick, but one of the natural group components of being human beings that we've tried to take advantage of is developmental heterogeneity. So if you are older and you are with somebody who's younger, there's this natural kind of relationship that can be created where the person who's younger typically is watching and studying and is very happy to have the attention and support of the older person. And so we may have a child, let's say, that has a learning disability and they're in the 5th grade and they have a hard time reading, but they can read. They just have, it's slower. They're behind their peers. But what we would do is we would take that child, instead of sending him to a trailer to meet a tutor, we would have him and ask him and say, listen, we have a child who's in the 1st grade who's really struggling with reading. And we want you to spend some time with him and help him learn his letters and learn how to read. And so all of a sudden, this kid who in his head had been thinking of himself as, I have a problem and I need help, it's flipped. You're the expert. We want you to go teach this child how to read. And all of a sudden, reading, the meaning of reading for that child changes. It's not something you're bad at. It's something that you're pretty good at and you're teaching. And without even realizing it, they get more repetitions and they get more fluency, they get more competence. And both kids' reading level goes up at the same time that hopefully there's not as much marginalizing and excluding. You're elevating this person. You're like, wow, listen, I need your help. You're an expert on this. And that's a big part of that developmental heterogeneity that we think we can take advantage of. And actually the metrics, the NMT metrics, help us figure that out. So frequently we'll have a child who's got really bad social skills and they need practice. They need practice learning how to do reciprocal things like play games, or they need practice to learn how to do eye contact and all that kind of stuff. But they may have a splinter cognitive skill. And then we'll pair them with a child who's got good social skills, but might need a little bit of help with math. And so it's like putting together these puzzle pieces. Their strengths and their needs kind of complement each other. And we tell one that, this guy needs a little help learning how to, develop some social skills. And then we tell the other one, this guy needs a little help learning about mathematics. And so we send them off together and they both feel like they're the expert teaching the other, which is great. So
that is a really cool strategy. And kind of stepping back a little bit and looking a little more broadly at the educational system. I have to admit, I've just deep dived your podcast. So I've heard your commentary on the educational system, the carceral system, the mental health care system. And I see in all of those commentaries a bit of frustration about the ways that, first of all, they all kind of play together. And secondly, that they don't necessarily adapt to the best interests of the people who are within them. And this is a very big question, but I wonder if you could speak to what you see as one of the biggest systemic challenges that's inhibiting the welfare of kids in this country and how you would like to see it change.
Boy, There are a lot.
Start anywhere you want.
Pick one.
Well, one of the, I think, broadly speaking, and it's kind of related to what I was just talking about, I think one of the frustrations that's getting in the way of healthy development of everybody is that we continue to create systems and programs that either ignore or are openly disrespectful of the biology of human beings. So once you understand a little bit more about the sort of these sets of incredible gifts that our species has around the sponge-like rapid acquisition of content early in life, and your brain develops so rapidly early in life, and it's a time where we could create tremendous bang for our buck, investment buck, if we created safe, predictable housing and other social supports for young families, even if we only did it for 6 months. If you knew for the first 6 months of your life, the first 6 months of your baby's life, that you had a safe place to stay, you didn't have to worry about your income, you didn't have to worry about food, that was going to be, you're going to have people to help support you, that would allow this relational milieu that the parents are providing to really fully express the potential of that child, and then create essentially the raw material and the infrastructure that would let that child benefit from subsequent programmatic opportunities like education and other things that would be available to the child. But it would also create a stress response system that's more smoothly regulated, which would increase the probability that that child would have lower risk for physical health, social health, and mental health problems. So that's the one thing I think really, if we were more biologically respectful about the power of early childhood and acted on that, we would see literally quantum leaps in sort of the harvest of that would be great. The second thing is the other major biological characteristic of human beings, I kind of mentioned it, is that human beings are very relational creatures. We want to belong. We have this relational neurobiology, yet we've created systems that are very non-relational. And the presence of screens and the ubiquitous quality of screens, particularly phones with younger kids, younger and younger and younger, is getting in the way of the normal development of these systems in our brain that are involved in forming and maintaining healthy relationships. And I think that, Jonathan Haidt just wrote a really good book about this, that people are going to have to should really think about what he's reporting on in that book. There's a fundamental change in development when you grow up in the presence of screens the way our more recent generations have been growing up. So
I have to ask, I started reading the book because that's the third time I've heard you reference it. And so I just have to ask, the part about his 4 radical things that we need to do, the fundamental reform, do you agree with those? Do you feel like those are what we have to do, which was the no phone before 9th grade, no social media before 16, phone-free school zone, and the more uninterrupted child play, which I think we talked about a lot from your first couple. It was just so powerful because you had recommended it when I was listening to it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is...
Well, those are the things. I mean, I do believe that if it, I don't think that they're practical, but if we acted on those things, I really do think that we'd see shifts in the rates of anxiety and depression and substance use. And I think that that's true. I think the dilemma is we don't live in a society that is good at prohibiting anything. I mean, even if it's like, we couldn't prohibit, we're having a hard time prohibiting smoking and alcohol. So we know that it's really bad for you. It's a huge morbidity around those things. So I think rather than sort of having these prohibitions, I think what we need to do is begin to think about screens like the way we initially thought about hygiene. It used to be that people, and this sounds kind of crass, but people used to just pee and poop on the streets wherever. And this happened all the way up until, just a few hundred years ago in Western civilization. There was no real awareness that that was not good for people because it spread, disease and created all kinds of kind of toxic pathological conditions. And so rather than prohibiting pooping, which is hard to do, we tried to socialize it, right? We created an ethic that you do that away from other people. You do it in a place that is away from where you cook, away from where you eat, away from where you sleep. And we teach little kids to do that. Otherwise, they just poop and pee everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So we socialize them.
So simple.
We socialize them into like that structure. So I really think what we need to do is think about how do we teach screen hygiene, right? So that people will literally grow up thinking, wow, well, who would ever have a phone at dinner? It just would be like who would ever pee at dinner? You just would never do it. You excuse yourself and you go to the restroom. And so I think if we start to teach and have systemic expectations and rules about when you use a screen, when you don't use a screen, and of course what that means is that process is going to have to start with the adults. We are going to have to control our use of screens when we have our phone on, when we have it off. Because if kids see us doing that, then they'll grow up learning that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
But that's
my daughter already.
that's what I think is a more practical application. I think prohibition never really works
Well,
because parents will be sneaking their kids' phones and and the technologies are going to change. I mean, honestly, people are going to be able to I know right now I have colleagues that are working on tape, literally like Scotch tape. You can put it on your body and it literally has got a screen. It's everything that you can do on a phone.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That
Yeah,
is
I mean,
wild.
my daughter already pretends to have a phone all the time. I mean, it's just because that's what she sees us doing, and that's what we use.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess I would always kind of justify it as like, well, of course I'm on my phone. Like, I don't get a newspaper. We don't have magazines. Like, it's how you consume all of those things. But I mean, I definitely understand that it's still it has effects.
Yeah.
That are maybe deeper than what we think.
Well, I was in a wedding and somebody took the phone call in front of me. To Dr. Perry, like, you should have gone to the TV room or the phone room.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
I kind of wonder from your perspective, is the screen addiction a neurological thing? Is this like a dopamine hits that we're getting as we're on these screens? Is it solving the fact that we're just less connected as a society and I'm just craving connection, so I'm trying to fill that? Some combination?
I think both of those things play into it. One of the things about, and again, you'll probably know this, but if you think about your life, our sensory apparatus, our visual preference for information, it sort of outweighs other stuff. So when we see something moving in our visual field, we'll be attracted to it. So think about yourself at like a party or something, or let's say it's like a mix. I don't know what the people do these days, but you're going, God, he must be 100 years old. But when you're with people and there's lots of people around, you're having conversations, think about how often you break gaze with somebody and sort of look at who's walking by and then reconnect and have the conversation. Or more interestingly, is the next time you're in a situation like that and there is a television on, just watch how often people will break gaze and look at the television for a moment. And it will be something as simple as the flicker that changes when it goes from the show to the commercial, that you'll look. And so we're continually breaking our attention because of visual stimuli. And so that's just the way our brain is. It's just designed that if something's moving in your visual field, you better look at it. So along comes Sesame Street. We're going to have best intentions to teach our children the alphabet, and we're gonna basically meet them where they are. They only have short attention spans, so it's gonna be loud and it's gonna be. And so what we did is we created a generation of kids who literally took this sort of predisposition and then put it on steroids. Oh, and then guess what? About 7, 8 years after that, MTV comes along and goes, hey, we do the same thing for this age kids, present this frenetic, this. And oh, by the way, filmmakers, rather than having long scenes, a lot of dialogue, we're going to make more scenes with a lot of frenetic activity and a far fewer words. And so when you talk to people that look at screenplays, the size of a screenplay has gotten thinner and thinner because there's fewer words. And more of the screen is filled with this frenetic. And you can't just have one explosion now, right? You got to have an explosion while you're jumping off a motorcycle, while you're going in. It's like, what the hell?
The key to every Michael Bay video.
Right. And so literally and here's the interesting thing about that. If you don't have that, adolescents and young adults will not go to the films, and you'll lose money. So films that are dialogue just don't make it anymore. There used to be quieter films with longer scenes, more nuance, more dialogue. They don't make money anymore. And so part of it is, not only do we have this preference, the brain does have a preference to visually presented content, but we then end up creating sort of a world that's responsive to our appetites. And then, of course, that means it reinforces the younger people who get exposed to that, and you go off in this transgenerational spiral into much more visually frenetic content. So that's one thing. The second thing is screens. There is some element of reward that we get from acknowledgement. And so it's that thing of being seen. I'm seen. Somebody liked they like my picture. They're in Mongolia. Why should that matter to you?
They're a
that
bot.
They like your picture of a bear. But it does. And so the irony is, what you get is you get a tiny little bit of reward, but it's never deep enough to be quenching. Thinking back on this spacing and dosing thing. So if you have a real reward, somebody you really care about gives you a full, total sensory sense of I value you, I see you, I love you. Not only is that deep, but you can create a memory that you can revisit, right? Oh, she said she loved me, and it helped. And so you get a little bit more. Oh, that was wonderful. She said she loved me. But if you get a like, it's like, dit, dit, dit. And you literally develop a reward hunger. And then you start seeking, it's like junk food for your reward system. You crave the taste of it, but it never really fills you up. And so there's people that just chase likes. And it's no surprise then that, interestingly enough, the people who are the loneliest and have the highest probability of having depression are the ones who will spend more time on Facebook. And so when you look at this stuff, this is kind of what we see, is that it's very powerfully attractive, and it's rewarding enough to make you stick, but it's not enough to quench you and fill you. And it really leads to a sense of emptiness. And so I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it definitely does. Wow. So I guess tying in with some of that stuff with phones and the way, I guess I have like a two-pronged question. One of them is, what are some things that non-clinicians, average people like ourselves, can do all the time, or what can we apply to our lives that can help make lasting change in the communities that we have influence in? That's one of them. And the second one is, with the research that you've done with NMT and all those things, it was groundbreaking at the time, and I think that it's still being learned by people that, hey, this is this is real stuff. But what are some of the new things, especially with the advent of social media and all the changes in technology that you're starting to learn and see that excite you about the research that you're able to do?
Both of those are good questions. And let me see if I can give some kind of satisfactory answer. So the first one's kind of tough. I mean, on one hand, it's tough. On the other hand, it's not. You know, each of us has opportunities every day to interact with other people. And what really makes an enduring change for any person, and then I think, therefore, for any community and culture, is if the interactions you have with a person are real. If you take a real moment to truly be present, and when you say, how you doing, you know, you just like, it's not just like you actually really want to know how somebody is doing. And you stop your busyness long enough to be fully present. And that, for that person, will be a quenching reward. And it will be a meaningful, regulating experience. And so in the tiniest little moments of sincere presence, that leads to basically to a powerful and positive experience. And so I think everybody can do that. Now there's a couple of keys to that. The ease with which you can do that is proportional to the degree to which you yourself are regulated. So it's important to really pay attention to your own needs. And I know that people always kind of feel, I feel guilty if I take time to go running, and I take time to go to my book club, and I take time to go out with my friends. The truth is, those are the things that fill you up and regulate you to the point where you can then turn around and give something to another person. And if you're so overwhelmed and so tired and so sleep deprived, you can check the box and say, yeah, I helped this person, and I helped this person, and I delivered food to that shut-in person. But it's like, if you deliver food and you kind of bring the food and you just looking at the clock and they're trying to tell you about their grandchild and you're not really there. That's for that person, and for you, really, for your intention is not realized, right? Your intention is to actually do this positive thing, make somebody feel connected, make them not feel so alone, and bring them a meal. And, if you can do that in a way that really fulfills the intention, or you can do it in a way that checks your box. And that's what we have to get away from. We tend to busy our lives way too much so that we can check our boxes, as opposed to making meaningful, quenching interactions that lead to change. So that's the one thing I think everybody can do. And a big part of that is, it's kind of captured by the simple phrase of just being kind. If you are kind to yourself, as kind to yourself as you would be to others, then you give yourself a break when you're not perfect. I'm not a perfect parent, right? Oh God, you yell at your kid. It's all right. Get back up on a horse, get on a parenting horse, go do the right thing. Say, listen, I'm sorry. I shouldn't yell. Everybody yells. Teachable moment. Come on, let's go do something fun. It's all about rupture and repair. And so you can have those moments. And if you are kind to yourself, take care of yourself, regulate yourself, then you can do that with your own family and with the people you work with. So that's the one thing that I'd recommend. Or that's not one thing, but sort of the broad approach.
Yeah.
The second thing, we're doing a lot of things that are pretty exciting. I mean, I think the most fun thing that we're doing is helping different people in different walks of life kind of recognize that there's a lot of power in understanding a little bit about the brain and a little bit about the way people work. So we have opportunities to talk to judges, and they're actually interested in these concepts and the relevance this has for the way they sentence people, for example, and the way they understand why somebody may have done something. And then we get to all the way we're doing a lot of really interesting stuff in sport, where athletes and coaches are learning a little bit about, if you're regulated and you don't yell so much, you actually might communicate the play better than if you're screaming at a kid in public around everybody they care about. That, that's probably not the best way to get to their cortex, So, I mean, it's fun to sort of, as people realize, wow, those concepts have relevance for me. And they influence the way I'm a parent, or the way I'm a partner, or the way, that explains why every time I get really, really upset, I need to go for a long walk, or I like to knit, or I like to listen to music. When people kind of understand what's under the hood in some of these things, it's I think it's a really positive experience. And so for me, I think the most fun thing is to see that these concepts are being taught by lots of people in lots of different arenas. And, and part of what's fun for me about that is that 30 years ago, when I talked about this, everybody thought, very few people saw the relevance or even thought it was accurate. And it's just fun to see the world change, that the change can happen. And which is a very hopeful part of our work, even though we do there's a lot of painful things that we see, and a lot of sad stories, and a lot of things that you shake your head and go, I can't believe that's really the way we do this. But I've been able to see in a couple of different areas of our work significant progress in the field in the last 20 years.
Yeah, it reminds me, Dave Paxton says always, once you understand NMT, it makes you a better person. And I think all of us at the Village have found that, even those of us who are not clinicians, we all get NMT as part of our training, no matter what. So it really has. It's informed the way I parent. It's informed the way I react. I engage with friends and family. So it's a gift to understand your neurobiology and to start to understand that of others. As, a lay person who never took a neuroscience class in our life, but
that's what I was going to say. I started reading your books because of working with the Village Network, and I don't like reading at all. And I made it. I'm like I said, I'm in the middle of Born for Love, and I did Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and loved them both. And I never thought that I would be somebody who's like, oh, I want to read more about neuroscience. But yeah, it's just like it once you know, and you don't want to, I don't know, behave or perform as a human any differently, or you shouldn't, once you understand, the type of things you can inflict on somebody just by,
the aha moments of reading your books and just the trauma-informed environments that, to both of your points, it has changed the way I manage people and the way I approach things. Mm-hmm. It has changed the way I operate. And at 48, I didn't know that could happen.
Yeah.
But here we are, and I love it, because I'm also looking at myself and going, what happened to me? Mm-hmm. Right. And so it's really powerful work. If you would have told me 20 years ago I'd be doing this, I would have said, no way. Yeah. Here I am, and I love it.
Well, and I mean, like, I think that's the same reaction. I told my therapist that that I got to be on a podcast and interview you, and she said that you have to tell him that I'll read you what she said. She said, Bruce Perry changed my life in a paradigm-shifting way, personally, and also changed my approach to working with my clients. Your work made me start using the ACE test on all my intakes, and it helped me give a framework for what happened to people, and it has changed everything. So she is very grateful for all of your work and what you've done for the world of neuroscience and child psychiatry and psychiatry in general. So it's more than just organizations like the Village Network. It is truly, it's impacting people everywhere, which is awesome.
So can we do this every day?
Absolutely. If you need presidents of your fan club, we're all free.
Yeah, if you need it, we can just do like a morning call for 20 minutes, and we'll just tell you all the nice things that we love about you and your work. And but yeah,
just to say, I first of all, thank you for all those kind of comments. It's nice to hear, and I feel bad sometimes because a lot of our work, when I say our, I mean, I'm part of this really big community, and part of the work is from the work at the Village Network. I mean, you guys have done incredible work that's been really helpful in my maturity as a clinician and an educator. And so I feel a little bad sometimes because people give me way too much credit, but it's just, again, this is one of those things about when you learn about how the brain works and how people work, you realize that human beings are storytelling creatures, right? We like stories. We learn things in context of narrative and concepts and sort of sometimes when there's a personification of a concept, it's easier for people to connect with. So so I think that a lot of times I get an undue amount of credit because of that personification tendency, right? People tend to give me credit for stuff that maybe is not necessarily my stuff. So but I appreciate the comments nonetheless. You can see this. The Zoom camera will not hold my head.
Well, and we did create a pocket Perry. So we are actually
Oh my
having these
gosh.
produced. You'll have to listen to the other content for this series, but it has pocket Perry on one side. On the back side, it says the most powerful therapy is human love by Dr. Bruce Perry. So we are going to send you one of those, but it is going to be shaped like the old-fashioned keychain. They're plastic, and it's like the old-fashioned hotel keychains that hardly fit in your pocket. But we created a pocket Perry after the first time we talked to you, so we're sending you one. You'll have your own pocket Perry.
There is one more question that I want to ask if we can, and it goes back to one of the things that I think Lynette mentioned, just about making some systems of change. And you mentioned, or you talked about changing systems as far as, like for the first 6 months, having a safe environment for that developmental period. And so I think what our question is not only, I guess, the barrier to making those changes is not knowledge, right? We have the research, we have the understanding that those things can be impactful. So what sort of systems do we need to change on a societal level? Is it the way we vote? Is it the way that we view child development? Is it as a whole, outside of the outside of the neurosciences field?
Yeah.
Do we need to have more education to the greater public, or I guess, what are the ways that we can implement that on a large scale level? Obviously, and if we take it into more of a political or country type or civilization type thing, there are Western nations that have somewhat figured it out, right? I mean, like Scandinavia, it seems like France has some things that allow those developmental periods to happen in a more safe or at least freeing environment for the parents. So what do you see, I guess, for the US and the just greater society on how we can remove, like I said, obviously knowledge is not the barrier. It's changing the system. So what are the ways that we can do that?
Good question. And honestly, I have been thinking about systemic change for a long time. And I used to think it was knowledge, right? I used to think, well, just once you learn about this, you're going to
Just
go
tell
ahead and
people.
change
Yeah,
things.
knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Let's change the world.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, oh yeah, sure. Tell the judges about this stuff, and they'll change. And it took me a while to realize that that's not the way systems change. And I'm actively trying to study and learn a little bit more about systemic change. And I think we have some ideas, but the bottom line is that policy changes in response to both internal pressure and external pressure. And so the internal pressure is helping people that are within any system understand the concepts and have a direct, actionable, set of things to do. And then having enough external pressure so the system feels that it has to change. And it's interesting. I remember a long time ago, I was talking about this very issue with the person who was the head of child welfare in New Jersey. And he was driving me to the airport. And he said, what our problem is, that we're just good enough. And what that really meant was that we're good enough to not get in trouble with the press and to not get in trouble with sort of external observers of what we do. But we fundamentally are doing a crappy, mediocre job. And she said, we see more change in child welfare systems that have done a horrible job, where there's been pressure from the press and from the governor and from other people, where there's they take away power from the state and make, assign a conservator, a judge says, we're taking over your system. And then they revise the system. And so that's part of our problem, is a lot of our systems are just good enough. And in order to reorganize them, they almost have to be disorganized to a level that's sometimes pretty tragic. And again, if you may not remember some of this stuff and you may not have been exposed to it, but one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about normal development is that development's not linear. You don't just go from 6 months to 1 year to 2. All of those things just don't go up. What happens is there's this little sort of the period of development, and then there's kind of a plateau where the child learns things and exposed to things, and then there's a regression where they disorganize and they're like, wait a minute, he hasn't wet the bed forever, and he didn't throw like this, and he's tantruming, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's a quantum leap, and you're like, wow, they're doing things that they've never done before. And that's the way development in systems works too, is that systems kind of plug along and mediocre, then they dissolve. And then something bad happens, is a child death, and then there's a scandal with the administrator, and administrator leaves, and a new administration, and everybody, FTEs are left unfilled, and then there's a reorganization, and hopefully that reorganization includes all of this accumulated stuff you learned during that plateau period, and then you come back reorganized a little bit better. But it's painful to live through the disorganizing period, which in government can last a long period of time. And so that's part of the dilemma, is that we don't really know how to reorganize systems in a good way unless the systems are completely unraveled. And when they unravel, people get hurt. People are left behind, people are missed, and it's a brutal process. And COVID actually is an example of one of those things that's going on. I mean, right now, our educational systems, we're plodding along as okay, really not doing great work. There's lots of stuff that needs improvement. And then there's this disorganizing thing from COVID, and we're in the bottom of one of these things now. And I think that as some of these systems reorganize, they're going to come back better than ever. But right now, we're in the midst of, we can't recruit, we can't retain. We've got horrible stressors on families and kids and teachers, and it looks ugly. But I think if we take the lessons from what we've been learning over the last 20 years and incorporate them in a new way, we're going to start to see some reinventions, some innovations pop up and be better than we were before. But it's going to take a while.
Since you study the brain, is that like a human condition that we just want things to get bad enough before we want to do something about it? Is it like something that's within us that we're not really willing to fix something that's working or improve something that's working?
It's related to something that we talk about in the neurosequential model, that once you create like a worldview about the way things work, or the way people should be disciplined, or it was good enough for me and look how I turned out. Once you get that stuff in your head, you feel more comfortable with the familiar, even if the familiar involved, oh yeah, I got the hell beat out of me whenever I did something wrong, and now look at me, I'm responsible, I'm on time now. It's like, ooh, there might have been another way to get there, but that's what happens, is people are comfortable with the familiar, and the more stress they get, the more they retreat to the familiar. And so this is what's really challenging. We're seeing this right now in education, again, as an example. whereas there was the development of somewhat progressive relationally based stuff around discipline in schools, now that everything's really struggling, there's more problems and kids are behaviorally acting out. Now they're going back to expel, restrain, suspend, and it feels regressive to a lot of people who are, pushing other directions. But it's because people are overwhelmed. They're shutting down their cortex and they're retreating to what's familiar, and that's a very common thing. When people feel threatened or overly distressed, they kind of retreat to the familiar.
Interesting. That makes sense. I mean, there's especially in education, there are no resources to be able to have what you need.
It's heartbreaking.
My wife is not the only one who has left education in recent years.
Sounds like they need to sit with the uncomfortable and figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, and Dr. Perry, I know you couldn't see us when you were talking at the OCA conference, but when someone asked you how to get more people involved in early childhood mental health, and you paused and you said, well, pay them more. I don't know if you know this, but you got a standing ovation.
I did.
The room erupted.
And I think that, this resource scarcity or perceived resource scarcity is at the root of so many of these problems. The idea that we can't fund things that desperately need our attention.
Yeah. And that again is, the irony of this, as you all know this, but the people who are responsible for providing the learning environment for children, where everyday interactions and opportunities for motor development, social, cognitive, emotional, really every aspect of a person's being are shaped profoundly by early childhood educators, they get paid less money, probably 1/10 the amount of money that some old college professor gets, because he wants to twist a tiny little part of the cortex involved in learning geology. And nothing against geology.
I can confirm that.
But that's, a geology professor at a university is not changing your social functioning or your motor functioning or really most of your cognitive functioning. They're just twisting a tiny little variant of a part of your cortex involved in obscure aspects of knowledge, which, again, it's not bad, but comparatively, if you came from outer space and you looked at the proportionality of impact, you'd go, why the hell are these people elevated and these people degraded? So
that's a great question.
Wow.
And I'm going to say this completely insincerely, because I could talk to you for hours, but we want to be respectful of your time. And we're so grateful that you've given us so much of your time to talk to the Village Network and to talk to us about your work here and to explain things to normies like us.
Yes.
And answer our questions as well. We could not be more grateful.
Yeah, we're so thankful.
I'm
Thank you so much.
honored to do it. And listen, I hope you guys have me back on your show.
We would love to.
Please do. I'm already envisioning a part 2 about why capitalism is bad, according to Dr. Bruce Perry. So.
That, and then
There goes all my funding.
that, and then we'll talk about religion as well.
Yeah.
And how that affects the brain.
Yeah.
We'll explore that next time. But Dr. Bruce Perry, thank you so much. This has just been so. You have 3 huge fans in the room, so thank you for your time. We thoroughly appreciate you, and we will ship you your pocket Perry once they come in.
I cannot wait.
Oh yeah, so you can keep yourself regulated, and your keys, which will help you get out of the door faster. So we appreciate
Thank you guys. And listen, thank you for doing this, because I one of the major goals of our work is to share these concepts with as many people as we can. And I could sit around and write an academic article and maybe 15 people would read it. And you do a podcast and you're going to reach thousands. So I think that's what you're doing is really important. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Well, take care, Dr. Perry. We'll see you soon. And now that we have our wrap up, we do have one question. What's the bear mean?
Oh, the bear?
Yes.
The bear is a bear I ran into on snowshoeing last year up in Canada.
Okay.
Did you pet
It
the
was
bear?
just coming out of hibernation. And did you see how big it is?
Yes.
It's huge.
Can you imagine how big it was when it went in to hibernation? Anyway, I was out snowshoeing up in the Canadian Rockies, close to where I spent a lot of time up there. So unexpectedly, the only clear place on the side of a slope of a mountain was this tiny little open patch. And sure enough, there's a huge grizzly bear there. I turned the corner and he looks at me and I looked at him, and fortunately he just kept, digging for grubs. And after I realized he was not going to do anything, I said, well, I'm going to take a picture. If you don't, as long as you're not going to eat me, I'll take a picture. So I literally got to watch him for like 10 minutes, which is really unusual. And I was very close. But he every once in a while he'd look up at me and I wasn't moving. I was talking all the time, and he just kept digging they dig for roots and grubs, and the bear ate for a while and then just sort of turned around and walked through like shoulder deep snow like it was nothing. It was crazy. Just a huge, massive animal. Anyway, that's the bear.
Experience.
Well, thank
Very
you. 'Cause
cool.
I saw him over your shoulder during the OCA conference conversation, and I was like, I've seen that bear before, so I wanted to ask.
Well, this is a different bear.
Oh, that's a different bear?
Oh, okay.
This is a different bear. I thought you were talking about this bear.
The one that's on your...
Yeah,
that one.
Yes.
That's the bear I ran into snowshoeing.
Oh, wow.
And this is the bear I ran into on a hike. I was actually climbing a mountain with my granddaughter. And we were on the access trail, and we turned the corner, and there was this bear eating berries. And fortunately, also, I got her behind me and got the bear spray out, and the bear just kept eating. And then it came right up on the trail and walked literally right by us. And
Wow.
I had a camera on my chest. I couldn't take my hand off the bear spray though, so I just let it walk by, and I went. So these photos aren't as good, but
Wow.
this bear was a lot closer.
That's awesome.
That is so
Yeah.
cool. And also, I'm impressed that you were able to access the part of your brain that knew how to work a camera in that moment. So.
Well, I had 30 seconds to kind of compose myself. Mostly, it's interesting. I went into like this dissociative protective mode for my granddaughter, and had her get behind me. And unfortunately, there was nowhere to go. It was either down the mountain or up. We couldn't climb up any higher, so we had to share the trail with the bear, who actually was very calm, just kind of like what's up? Walked by. What's up?
That's a very
But it was-
cool story.
Yeah.
Very cool
Oh,
story.
goodness.
Very cool.
Okay, so is your next book going to be a wilderness book? Like
Yeah.
taking a break
No,
from...
actually, I don't know where I actually wrote a book called Brief. It was I was trying to see. It was like an ebook. I was just exploring that kind of stuff of self-publishing, and I put a bunch of my photographs into the book, and it's online. It's like in Kindle. It's just a number of essays that I've pulled from other things that I've written, and but mostly what I wanted to do is just see how to make these books. So because we were thinking about self-publishing for a while, and I may make a little nature book. I got a lot of photos.
That would be really cool. You team up with Bill Bryson, and yeah, that would be a great collaboration.
Well, thank you for your time, Dr. Perry.
Thank you so much.
No problem. See you guys, and
See you
thank
soon.
you.
Thank you.